Williams talking to me earlier. Now, the Japanese authorities this week announced that the disaster at the Fukushima nuclear power plant is now a level 7 incident, the highest measure, the same as Chernobyl. You might think that the disaster might turn people off nuclear power, and indeed some countries are rethinking their programs. But for one leading green activist, it seems to have done the opposite. To the fury perhaps of some of his colleagues, Monbiot, one of the best-known environmentalists in the world, has written that, quote, "The crisis at Fukushima has converted me to the cause of nuclear power." So how come? Well, George is here now to explain all these things. Welcome, George.
Thank you very much.
Good to have you with us. What was the cause of Fukushima leading to this conversion?
Well, it was a perfect storm, wasn't it? A really shoddy old plant, built in the worst possible place on a fault line and a tsunami-prone coast, managed by a company which fell short in all its duties, cut corners, managed it appallingly, gets hit by a force 9 earthquake and a monster tsunami, takes out the power supply, causes partial meltdown, causes explosions, and has caused a terrible amount of distress and disruption and, evacuation and all the rest of it. And yet, it remains the case that as far as we know, and we've got a pretty good idea on this so far, no one has yet received a dose of radiation known to be lethal. And this really got me thinking. I thought, well, this is horrible. What's happening in Fukushima is horrible. But look at what's happening, say, in China, for example. Where in the coal industry, every year, 2,400 people die in mining accidents just to extract coal alone. And that's to say nothing of the hundreds of thousands who contract lung diseases, horrible, horrible diseases, which often cause a very prolonged and extremely painful and unpleasant death. And what we have to do as human beings, but also particularly as environmentalists and as humanitarians, is to consider the consequences of any particular policy we do in the roundest possible way. And if the likely outcome, as it seems to be, is that we get out of nuclear power as a result of Fukushima and go instead into more coal burning, which seems already to be happening in some parts of the world, then the result will be that far more people will be harmed and killed by that.
So that in fact you've come to the conclusion that nuclear power is here to stay, should be here to stay, and that the alternatives are worse, not better.
I don't like nuclear power, and I'm deeply suspicious of the nuclear industry, which has got a very bad record of corner cutting and messing with paperwork and messing with radioactive pollution, all of that. It's a bad option, nuclear power, but fossil fuels are a far worse option. And they're a worse option partly because of the people immediately killed in the extraction and the processing of them, partly because of the local pollution that they cause, which is again devastating to people's health and devastating to the environment. We're talking about sulfur pollution, heavy metals, also quite a lot of radioactive pollution, more than an average nuclear power plant is produced by coal power plants for the same amount of energy. But then, of course, the big one is global warming. Now, we are quite rightly concerned about the evacuation, which is necessitated by these nuclear accidents, and also, of course, about the massive problem of decommissioning old nuclear plant. But think of the evacuations which climate change could cause over far wider areas of the world. Think of the problem of decommissioning the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which seems almost insoluble. And it's not that any of this is to suggest that nuclear power is a good option, but the alternatives are just far, far worse.
And obviously the nuclear situation, the anti-nuclear situation, has been very, very powerfully put forward, because you've said yourself in these 3 weeks that you've been re-examining the situation, that you've said that in fact you were misled, you were lied to, and there was the anti-nuclear movement to which I once belonged has misled the world about the impacts of radiation on human health. And your very trenchant example here was that experts that you trusted invented evidence that nearly 1 million people died of radiation poisoning after the 1986 Chernobyl meltdown. Fantastically powerful anti-nuclear point. 1 million people died. But you say now that if you look at it now, just 134 people suffered acute radiation. 134, and not all of those died. Now, why was there such a powerful anti-nuclear lobby that even hypnotized you for a moment?
Well, I think the problem is that we all tend to associate with people who believe the same things as we believe. And ideas circulate within those closed communities, and they tend to then get exaggerated and inflated. And I completely accept that radioactive pollution is very dangerous stuff, but the kind of figures and the kind of claims that many of the people who have been talking about it have been making have no grounding in science whatsoever. We just have to have some perspective here, and we have to be rooted in science. I mean, what is this environment movement if it is not rooted in science? And as an environmentalist, I feel that unless we can justify and support all the positions we take with good, solid science, then it's not just that we run the risk of misleading other people, we run the risk of wasting our own lives. Why waste your life chasing unicorns, doing things which are responding to myths rather than to necessary moral imperatives?
Well, thank you very much for that. We'll turn to that subject on another day and so on, but thank you for sharing these stop-press thoughts with us, George.
Thank you very much, David.
Thanks, David.